At 12:17 in the morning, the eastern wall of Ashmere Winter Garden began to scream. Hail struck its century-old glass panes like handfuls of gravel. Heating pipes shuddered beneath the tiled floor, and a damaged emergency alarm released a metallic cry through the tropical house. 9-year-old Eli Reed dropped beneath a potting bench and covered his ears. "Make it stop. Eli, look at me. It sounds like the water." Silas Reed knelt in the wet soil, careful not to crowd his son. He was the garden's night caretaker, irrigation technician, and a single father who had learned that fear could not be argued out of a child. It had to be carried with him until it became smaller. Then the outer door opened, and a woman entered with 2 rain-soaked suitcases. Mud stained her trousers. Water streamed from her dark hair. Less than an hour earlier, her husband had called her barren, defective, and unworthy of continuing his family name. Yet she did not look defeated. She looked quiet, awake, dangerous in the way deep water is dangerous when no one understands its depth. The stranger crossed the greenhouse, lowered the alarm volume, and tapped 3 times on a copper irrigation pipe. "Listen to me," she told Eli. "That is metal shaking, not water rising. Tap, tap, tap. 3 sounds, 3 breaths." Eli looked up. Hail continued beating against the roof, but his breathing slowed until the entire garden seemed to breathe with him. Silas did not know the woman's name. He did not know she controlled the geothermal company upon which the most powerful waterfront developer in the city depended. He knew only that she had given his son something terror had taken away: control. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and second chances, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Silas Reed. Silas noticed the suitcases after Eli climbed into his arms. One was expensive black leather with a brass lock. The other was an old canvas case repaired near the handle with gray thread. They looked as though they belonged to 2 different women. The one the stranger had been before midnight, and the one the storm had forced her to become. "Are you injured?" Silas asked. "No. Do you have somewhere to go?" That is a more complicated question. Most honest answers are. She looked through the glass doors toward the road, where floodwater had swallowed the tram tracks. Her face remained composed, but one hand tightened around the broken suitcase handle. Silas recognized pride trying not to become desperation. Years earlier, he had heard the same restraint in his own voice when he asked a shelter director whether fathers with children were allowed to stay overnight. "The bridges are closed," he said. "Nothing is leaving the river district before daylight. I can find a hotel. The hotels near the embankment evacuated their lower floors. Then I'll wait here. The garden closes at 10. Her chin rose slightly. "Are you asking me to leave?" "I'm offering a trade." He pointed toward a pressure gauge near the tropical house door. "The heating system is failing. Help me keep 3,000 plants alive, and you can use the spare room in the caretaker's cottage." "I don't accept charity." "Good. I don't offer it." She studied the gauge. A low vibration traveled through the pipes beneath their feet. Something changed behind her eyes. "Your secondary circulation pump is cavitating." Silas paused. "You diagnosed that from here?" "It is loud. Noise is loud. Causes are usually quieter." The woman removed her soaked coat, folded it across her suitcase, and rolled up her sleeves. "Show me the control manifold." Eli raised his head from Silas's shoulder. "Are you an engineer?" She glanced at him. "Among other things." "Can you fix anything?" "No." Her answer was immediate. "But I know what happens when people ignore small warnings." Silas looked at her wet luggage. Whatever warning she had ignored, it had followed her into the storm. Her name was Vivienne Hale. though that was not the name most people associated with Deepwell Thermal Industries. Publicly, Deepwell belonged to Warren Pike, a silver-haired chief executive who appeared at energy summits and spoke about sustainable cities in a voice designed to reassure governments. Privately, 63% of the company belonged to Vivian through trusts established before her 32nd birthday. She had designed Deepwell's first closed-loop geothermal exchange system inside a drilling warehouse inherited from her father. The prototype had been assembled from recycled pumps, discarded pipes, and a control board Vivian soldered by hand during nights when she could not afford a technician. 11 years later, Deepwell heated schools, factories, transit centers, and entire residential districts without burning fuel. Vivian did not inherit an empire. She built one beneath the ground, where people seldom looked until something failed. Her husband, Adrian Mercer, believed she was an independent environmental strategist who occasionally advised Deepwell's regional office. Vivian had encouraged that belief because Adrian's pride was fragile and beautifully disguised. On their fourth date, he told her that powerful wives eventually turned their husbands into ornaments. She should have left before dessert. Instead, she laughed, reduced her work to technical consulting, and let him imagine himself as the architect of their future. Adrian founded Mercer Urban Ventures, a development company built on polished presentations, municipal favors, and increasingly reckless debt. Its survival depended upon Crown Harbor, a luxury waterfront district of towers, hotels, artificial canals, and heated pedestrian streets. Deepwell was expected to construct the underground thermal network. Without its certification, the city's green development bonds would not be released. Without those bonds, Adrian's lenders could seize the project. Vivienne had spent 3 years protecting him without his knowledge. She arranged bridge financing through anonymous subsidiaries. She extended engineering reviews. She convinced Deepwell's board to keep negotiating after Adrian ignored warnings about unstable ground beneath the harbor. She called it loyalty. In truth, she had been holding up a collapsing wall while the man behind it criticized her for failing to build a nursery. 3 hours before she entered Ashmere Winter Garden, Vivian stood beneath the chandelier in the Mercer townhouse, while Adrian read the fertility report as though it were a failed quarterly statement. "No viable embryos," he said. "I read it. 4 procedures. I can count. Then you understand what this means. It means the treatment failed." Adrian folded the report with unnecessary precision. "It means you failed." Vivian stared at the man whose company she had secretly rescued twice. He wore the blue suit she bought before his first meeting with the mayor. Behind him, architectural renderings of Crown Harbor covered the walls. In those images, the towers were already complete, the harbor calm, and every window reflected a future Adrian believed belonged to him. His mother, Eleanor, stood beside 2 suitcases near the door. She had packed Vivian's belongings herself, leaving behind several pieces of jewelry she considered part of the Mercer family. "We should remain civilized," Eleanor said. "Adrian has the Harbor Lights Festival tomorrow." Vivian turned to her husband. "You invited your mother before telling me?" "She understands the importance of continuity." "Continuity? An heir." Adrian's voice remained calm. That calmness revealed more than shouting could have. "I need someone to inherit what I am building. I cannot waste the rest of my life waiting for a body that refuses to cooperate." The words entered Vivian without producing the dramatic break he seemed to expect. The marriage had cracked over years in smaller places, clinics where he checked emails, dinners where Eleanor mentioned younger women, bedrooms where tenderness became scheduled labor. "What about adoption?" Vivian asked, although she knew his answer. Adrian shook his head. "I want my own child. A child is not property. That is easy for you to say. Why?" His eyes dropped to the medical report. "Because you cannot produce one." Eleanor opened the front door. Rain swept across the marble floor. Vivian lifted the suitcases. "You will regret making a scene," Eleanor whispered. Vivienne looked around the house she had quietly saved from foreclosure. "No," she said, "but you may regret what happens when I stop protecting all of you." Silas Reed knew little about hidden fortunes, but he understood failing systems. Before becoming Ashmere's caretaker, he spent 11 years mapping underground water movement for wildfire recovery teams. After flames stripped hillsides bare, he walked through blackened valleys, measuring soil pressure and predicting where the first hard rain would turn ash into a moving wall. He could read ground the way other men read faces, by color, fracture, weight, and what disappeared beneath the surface. His marriage failed more slowly. His wife, Dana, became dependent on prescription medication after a spinal injury. Silas spent 2 years navigating rehabilitation programs, relapses, promises, and apologies. One winter night, Dana left their apartment while Eli slept. She emptied their savings account and disappeared for 7 months. When she returned, Silas allowed supervised contact, but a second relapse ended with Eli trapped alone in a flooded basement room while Dana was unconscious upstairs. The boy survived because a neighbor heard him striking a pipe. Since then, alarms, rushing water, and locked doors could pull him back into that darkness. Silas left fieldwork because travel made stable fatherhood impossible. Ashmere's former director offered him the night position and the neglected cottage behind the orchid house. The salary was small, but the garden gave Eli routine, space, and a world that grew quietly. In the boiler room, Vivienne pressed a screwdriver against the pump casing and listened through its handle. "The bearing is damaged," she said, "but the intake restriction is the immediate problem." Silas checked the valve. It was replaced last month, with the wrong diameter. "You sound offended." Poor workmanship is a form of dishonesty. Together they rerouted the flow, reduced pressure in the fern house, and restored heat to the eastern wing. Steam moved through the pipes. High above them, frozen condensation began sliding down the glass like silver rain. Eli stood in the doorway holding a blanket around his shoulders. "Dad," he whispered. The trees stopped shaking. Silas looked at Vivienne. For the first time that night, her expression softened as though saving roots had reminded her that usefulness was not measured by blood. The caretaker's cottage smelled of cedar, damp wool, and the cinnamon toast Silas made whenever Eli could not sleep. It contained 2 narrow bedrooms, an uneven kitchen table, and shelves crowded with seed catalogs, geological surveys, old radios, and repaired clocks that never displayed the same time. Vivienne expected an apology for the modest space. Silas offered none. He carried her suitcases inside, placed clean towels beside the spare bed, and began heating soup without asking whether she preferred something more refined. There was dignity in the way he moved, not the loud dignity of men who announced every sacrifice, but the quiet kind that survived being overlooked. Eli sat at the table constructing a bridge from wooden plant labels. "The narrow pieces keep falling," he said. Vivienne examined the structure. "Your base is too close together. Dad said the same thing. Your father appears occasionally useful." Silas placed a bowl before her. "I'll record that for future disputes." Eli widened the supports and tried again. This time the bridge held. "Did you build bridges?" he asked. "Not bridges people can see." "Then what did you build?" Vivienne hesitated. "Systems that move heat through the ground." "Like roots? A little? Do you have children?" The question landed without cruelty, but Vivienne's fingers tightened around the spoon. Silas opened his mouth to redirect him. She answered first. "No." Eli nodded, accepting the fact without judgment. "You can borrow me when Dad gets annoying." Silas looked offended. "I am consistently delightful. You make oatmeal without sugar. That is responsible parenting." Later, after Eli fell asleep on the sofa, Vivienne stood beside the kitchen window reading Adrian's messages. He had sent 6. None asked whether she was safe. My husband ended our marriage because I may never become pregnant, she said. Silas leaned against the counter. May never? The probability is low. That is not the same as certainty. It was enough for him. He called you broken? A dry field. Silas looked toward the dark greenhouse. Then he understands neither women nor fields. Exhausted ground can still hold roots. It only stops feeding people who take without restoring anything. Vivienne slept for less than an hour. At dawn, she sat at Silas's kitchen table while gray light entered through leaves outside the window. She called Miriam Locke, Deepwell's general counsel, before the attorney reached her office. Suspend Crown Harbor. Silence followed. All work? Miriam asked. Certification, technical support, and preliminary commitments. The Harbor Lights Festival begins at 6 this evening. Adrian is publicly opening the new promenade. I know. The city bond signing is scheduled for Monday. It will not happen. Miriam lowered her voice. Is this because of your marriage? Vivian looked toward the sofa, where Eli slept with one hand beneath his cheek. Silas stood outside repairing a storm shutter in the rain. My marriage ended last night. I'm sorry. Do not put that in the record. Use the altered groundwater surveys, the substituted casings, and the unapproved drainage changes. Those problems existed yesterday. Yes. Yesterday you instructed us to continue negotiating. Vivian closed her eyes. Truth demanded more than exposing other people. Sometimes it required turning the light toward oneself. I protected him, she said. I told myself additional time would make him responsible. And now? Now Deepwell will treat him like every other applicant. Miriam breathed out slowly. I have waited years to hear you say that. Convene the Emergency Risk Committee. Send inspectors to every Crown Harbor thermal access point. There is another problem. The city granted temporary public use approval for tonight's festival. Mercer's people are already installing stages and food stalls. Vivienne looked through the window toward the river, where clouds still pressed low over the skyline. Can Deepwell stop the event? Not without a municipal emergency order. We can withdraw our crews. Do it! After the call, Silas entered carrying the broken hinge. He had heard enough. You control Deepwell, he said. Yes, and your husband does not know. No, you are suspending his project the morning after he threw you out. Vivian's gaze hardened. The project is unsafe. It was unsafe last week. Be careful. Silas placed the hinge on the table. Justice and revenge sometimes carry the same evidence. The difference is whether you admit why today feels easier than yesterday. Vivienne wanted to dismiss him as an underpaid caretaker speaking beyond his station. That thought disgusted her the moment it appeared. Adrian had trained her to measure authority through rooms, suits, and titles. Silas measured it through responsibility. You think I should let the project continue? She asked. No. Then what exactly are you accusing me of? Nothing. I'm asking whether you plan to save people or punish Adrian. Both may happen. They may, but only one should guide your hands. He opened a drawer and removed an old harbor map. Crown Harbor's new promenade sits above a buried tidal channel. My grandfather maintained the drainage pumps before this garden hired him. He used to say the river remembers every path people force it to forget. Vivian spread the map across the table. The channel crossed beneath the temporary public plaza where Adrian planned to hold the festival. Deepwell's current plans classify this area as compacted fill. It isn't. Silas pointed to 3 faded lines. These are pressure vents. 2 were sealed during early construction. The 3rd runs beneath Ashmere's northern cistern. Why wasn't this in the municipal archive? It was. The digital copy removed the handwritten notes. Vivian studied the markings. Tonight's tide will be unusually high, and last night's rain saturated the ground. The temporary promenade should never have received public approval. Adrian wanted photographs before the bond signing. Vivian pulled out her phone. Deepwell's engineering director answered immediately. She ordered an emergency field inspection and sent the map. 10 minutes later, the director called back. Mercer Security had denied inspectors access to the central pumping chamber because festival preparations were underway. They cannot deny Deepwell access, Vivian said. They claim the thermal agreement is not final. Then call the city. The deputy commissioner is attending Adrian's reception. He says there is no documented emergency. Vivian ended the call. Silas folded his arms. What now? I go there. As Adrian's wife? No. As Deepwell's owner? She looked at the hidden lines beneath the harbor. Not yet. If I reveal myself before we confirm the danger, he will call it domestic retaliation. Silas picked up the map case. Then you need someone whose marriage is not involved. At 4 in the afternoon, Crown Harbor glittered beneath a cold clearing sky. Workers hung lanterns across the new promenade. Food stalls released the smells of cinnamon, roasted meat, and sweet dough. A temporary stage floated beside the seawall, where musicians prepared for the evening concert. Families arrived early because Adrian's company had advertised fireworks, ice sculptures, and free rides on a restored harbor ferry. The unfinished towers behind them were wrapped in giant banners showing the district as it would someday appear. Complete, elegant, permanent. Silas entered through a service gate wearing his old field coat and carrying the map case. Vivian walked beside him in a dark green suit delivered by a Deepwell assistant. Eli followed because the garden's day supervisor had been unable to reach the cottage through flooded roads. Silas had objected. Eli reminded him that the festival was public and that he had already promised to show him the river pressure gauges installed near the old lock. Stay beside me, Silas said. I know. No wandering. I know. If an alarm sounds, 3 breaths, find you, follow instructions. Vivian looked at the boy. You have a good memory. Bad memories take up a lot of space. Dad says we have to give the good ones shelves. Near the central gate, Mercer Security stopped them. Technical areas are closed, a guard said. Vivian presented Deepwell credentials under her consulting name. We need access to the pumping chamber. Mr. Mercer suspended non-essential inspections until after the festival. This is not non-essential, the guard's radio crackled. Adrian's voice came through, instructing staff to escort Vivian away if she appeared. The guard's expression changed when he heard her name. Mrs. Mercer, this is a private company event. Vivian looked at the hundreds of families entering behind her. No. It became a public safety event the moment you opened the gates. Silas stepped closer to the seawall. Beneath the music and generators, he heard something else. A low knocking under the pavement. Too slow for machinery and too regular for construction. He pressed his palm to the stone. The river is already inside. Adrian found them near the lantern arch while photographers documented his arrival. He wore a black overcoat, a silver festival pin, and the confident smile of a man who believed spectacle could overwrite reality. Eleanor walked beside him. When she saw Vivian, her expression hardened. You were told not to come. Vivian ignored her and faced Adrian. Shut down the festival. He laughed softly. Of course. The drainage channel beneath the promenade is pressurizing. You are an environmental consultant, not the city engineer. Deepwell inspectors were denied access because your little performance this morning disrupted the schedule. People are standing above saturated fill. Adrian lowered his voice. You are upset about last night. I understand that, but if you create panic here, I will have security remove you. Silas opened the old map. The channel beneath the central plaza was never stabilized. Adrian glanced at his clothes. And who is this? Silas Reed. The greenhouse caretaker. Former federal watershed analyst. Former. Adrian's smile sharpened. You have known my wife for less than a day, Mr. Reed. I suggest you avoid becoming involved in a private marital dispute. Silas's voice stayed low. Water is not private. The site passed inspection. The inspection used an altered map. Adrian looked toward Vivian. You brought him here to accuse me in front of the press. I brought him because he can hear what your contractors chose not to hear. A hollow metallic boom sounded beneath the promenade. Several nearby guests paused. Adrian glanced at the stage, where musicians continued playing. "Temporary equipment," he said. Silas crouched and placed 2 fingers against a seam in the paving stones. Muddy water beaded through the crack. "The third vent is reversing." "Meaning?" Vivian asked. "The buried channel cannot release pressure toward the river, so it is pushing inland." He looked toward the children's lantern maze erected over the lowest section of the plaza. "Get everyone off this promenade now." Adrian reached for Vivian's arm. "You will not destroy my opening." She pulled away. "Adrian, I am trying to stop your opening from destroying someone else." The first section of pavement dropped 6 inches at 6:42. There was no explosion, no cinematic warning. One moment, families stood beneath lanterns taking photographs. The next, tables tilted, glasses slid, and a deep crack traveled across the promenade like black lightning. Music stopped. Someone screamed. "Move toward the street," Silas shouted. "Not the seawall." 3 security guards began directing people toward the nearest exit, but the route crossed the sinking central plaza. Vivian seized a handheld radio from one of them. "Close the river gates. Clear the lantern maze. Shut down all temporary power." The guard stared at her. "Who authorized you?" A second crack answered before she could. The pavement near the food stalls collapsed into a cavity filled with black, surging water. A vendor disappeared to his waist. Silas pulled him free as the crowd began running. "Walk!" Silas shouted. "Do not push!" Parents grabbed children. Chairs overturned. The floating stage tore against one of its moorings and swung toward the promenade. Adrian climbed onto a platform and took the event microphone. "Everyone remain calm. The situation is under control." Silas looked at Vivian. "It isn't." Water burst through 3 drainage grates at once. Adrian's polished reassurance became static when the power failed. Darkness fell across half the plaza. Emergency lights flickered red. Eli froze. The sound of rushing water carried him back to the basement where he had once waited alone. "Dad," he whispered. "Dad, it's coming." Silas was 20 feet away, helping an elderly woman over a barrier. Vivian moved between Eli and the broken pavement. "Look at me." "I can't." 3 sounds. She struck the metal railing with her ring. Tap, tap, tap. 3 breaths. Eli inhaled. Around them, the city was shouting, but Vivian's voice stayed quiet. "Find your father." Eli raised his eyes. Silas held out his hand. The boy ran to him. Then a child's voice cried from inside the lantern maze. Its decorative walls had folded inward when the ground shifted, trapping several children above the rising cavity. Silas pushed Eli toward Vivian. "Keep him with you." "Where are you going?" "There are children inside. The ground is unstable." "I know." He climbed over the fallen barrier before she could stop him. The lantern maze had been built from lightweight wooden panels, but one steel support had pinned the exit shut. Water surged beneath the temporary floor. 3 children clung to the framework while an adult volunteer tried to lift the beam. Silas crawled across the panels, distributing his weight. "Do not move toward me," he told them. "Stay where the boards overlap." On the promenade, Vivian used the guard's radio to reach Deepwell's mobile crews, waiting outside the restricted perimeter. "Open the western thermal bypass," she ordered. "That line is not commissioned," an engineer replied. "Use it as a pressure sink. We need executive authorization." Vivian looked at the broken ground, the trapped children, and Adrian standing beneath a banner bearing his own name. Years of anonymity ended inside one breath. "This is Vivian Hale, controlling owner of Deepwell Thermal Industries. Executive authorization is granted." The radio went silent. Then the engineer answered. "Understood, Madam Chair." A nearby police captain turned toward her. Adrian heard it too. His face changed, not gradually, but completely. "What did he call you?" Vivian did not look at him. "Open the bypass," she repeated. "Shut every intake feeding Crown Harbor, route emergency pumps through Ashmere's north cistern. That could flood the garden. Plants can be replaced, children cannot." Deep well crews moved at once. Trucks forced their way through the service entrance. Technicians unlocked control cabinets. Mercer security had guarded all afternoon. The western bypass groaned open beneath the pavement. Pressure gauges rose, trembled, and began falling. Water stopped bursting from the nearest grate, but the cavity beneath the lantern maze continued widening. Silas reached the trapped children. "One at a time," he said. "No jumping. No looking down." The smallest girl shook her head. "I can't." Silas extended his hand. "Neither can I. We do it anyway." Eli watched his father disappear behind the fallen panels. Every instinct told him to run toward Silas, but Vivian held both of his shoulders. "He needs you to stay here. What if the floor breaks? Then we help him another way. You said plants can be replaced." "Yes. Dad's can't." The sentence struck Vivian harder than Adrian's cruelty had. She turned toward the deep well engineers. The western bypass reduced underground pressure, but Silas and the children remained trapped by the steel frame. A construction crane stood 30 yards away, its operator absent after the evacuation. "Can that crane move the support?" she asked. "Not safely from this angle," an engineer said. "The counterweight platform is on unstable ground." Eli pointed toward the floating stage, now jammed against the seawall. "The stage has cables." Vivian followed his gaze. 2 heavy mooring lines ran from the stage to a capstan near the promenade. "Could the capstan pull the frame sideways?" she asked. The engineer studied the distance. "Maybe, but the electrical control is underwater." "Manual release?" "Inside the seawall housing." Eli looked at the narrow service walkway leading toward it. "I know where it is. Dad showed me the old lock gauges." "Absolutely not," Vivian said. "The walkway is above the cavity," Eli argued. "And I'm smaller." "You are 9. That doesn't make me wrong." Silas's voice carried faintly from inside the maze. The steel support was settling lower. Vivian faced a choice no boardroom had prepared her to make. Protecting a child sometimes meant saying no. Sometimes it meant respecting the courage already inside him. She knelt. "You go only to the yellow housing. You clip the safety line before stepping onto the walkway. You return the moment I call." Eli swallowed. 3 sounds? 3 breaths. A firefighter secured him with a harness. The boy crossed the narrow walkway while water churned below. He reached the housing, opened the corroded latch, and pulled the manual lever with both hands. The capstan released. Deep well technicians attached the mooring cable to the fallen steel support. "Pull slowly," Vivian ordered. The cable tightened. Metal screamed. The trapped exit opened 12 inches. Silas pushed the first child through. The crowd had retreated behind police barriers, but nobody left. Hundreds watched firefighters, engineers, and strangers work beneath the dark lanterns. Adrian stood alone near the ruined stage, his festival pin hanging crooked from his coat. Eleanor reached him and whispered urgently, "You must say something before the press decides what happened." "She owns Deepwell," he said. "Lower your voice." "She owns it." The truth seemed to offend him more than the collapsing promenade. "She let me believe." Eleanor gripped his arm. "Not now." Adrian looked toward Vivian, who stood at the center of the rescue coordinating crews with a calm authority he had never permitted himself to imagine. A news camera captured the police captain asking for her judgment before redirecting emergency vehicles. Deepwell technicians called her Madam Chair. City officials who had ignored her calls now waited for instructions, yet she showed no triumph. Her attention remained on the lantern maze. The second child emerged, then the third. Silas crawled behind them, but the temporary floor shifted beneath his left leg. He fell through to his hip. The crowd gasped. Eli pulled against the firefighter holding his harness. "Dad!" Silas caught a crossbeam with both arms. Black water surged beneath him. Vivian moved to the edge. "Silas, look at me. I am a little busy." Even then, his dry humor steadied her. "The cable can hold the frame for 30 seconds. Then do not waste them explaining." Firefighters lowered a loop. Silas secured it around his chest, but the beam beneath him cracked. Eli struck the metal railing 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Silas looked toward his son. "3 breaths, Dad." The words crossed the broken promenade. Silas inhaled. On the 3rd breath, the firefighters pulled. The beam fell into the water as his body cleared the opening. When his boots touched stable pavement, Eli ran into his arms. No one cheered at first. The moment was too close to grief. Then one person clapped. Another followed. Within seconds, the entire harbor roared. Not for wealth, not for spectacle, but for a quiet father who had entered danger because children were waiting. The final danger came from the seawall. While emergency crews treated the rescued children, the western bypass began vibrating under the load. Deepwell's engineering director reported that the abandoned brine channel was redirecting pressure toward the unfinished marina. If the temporary retaining wall failed, a surge could strike the lower promenade where firefighters and medics were working. "Evacuate everyone uphill," Vivian ordered. Adrian stepped between her and the police captain. The retaining wall was reinforced last week. Silas, soaked and bleeding from one hand, looked toward the river. With what specification? Adrian did not answer. Vivian understood. The cheaper casings, the substituted steel, the same compromises her engineers had warned about. "You knew," she said. "I approved a temporary material adjustment. For a public festival?" The permanent work was scheduled after the bond release. A television microphone captured every word. Adrian noticed too late. The police captain's expression hardened. "Mr. Mercer, did you knowingly open this site before permanent reinforcement?" "That is not what I said." A deep boom rolled beneath the marina. Silas seized Vivian's arm. "Move!" They ran uphill as a section of the unfinished seawall folded inward. River water poured into the lower construction zone, overturning equipment and tearing festival decorations from their anchors. Emergency barriers held the crowd away. No one died. No child disappeared beneath the water. The temporary stage broke loose and drifted into the harbor, carrying Adrian's enormous illuminated logo with it. The letters flickered once, then went dark. The entire city watched the symbol of his legacy sink beneath the Black River. Adrian stood in the rain, surrounded by cameras, police, and the evidence of every warning he had dismissed. He looked at Vivian, expecting anger, perhaps satisfaction. Her face held neither. "You did this," he said weakly. "No," she answered. "I stopped hiding what you did." Behind her, Eli wrapped a blanket around Silas's shoulders. Deepwell crews continued working. Firefighters carried the final rescued child toward an ambulance. The harbor fell quiet, except for water moving through the place where Adrian's monument had been. It was not a boardroom that judged him. It was the city he had endangered. By midnight, the Harbor Lights Festival had become a national news story. Videos showed the promenade cracking, Silas crawling through the lantern maze, Eli crossing the service walkway, and Vivian identifying herself over the radio as Deepwell's controlling owner. Commentators replayed Adrian's recorded admission that permanent reinforcement had been delayed until financing closed. The city suspended Crown Harbor's public use permit. Police sealed the construction site. The mayor ordered an independent inquiry before dawn. Vivian refused every request for an interview until the rescued children were confirmed safe. She sat beside Silas in a temporary medical tent while a paramedic cleaned the cut in his hand. Eli remained pressed against his father's side beneath 2 silver emergency blankets. "You disobeyed me," Silas told him. Vivian gave permission. That is not helping. I followed the safety rules. You crossed a walkway above a collapsing channel. Eli's face tightened. You crawled into one. Silas closed his eyes. Vivian expected anger. Instead, he pulled his son close. You were brave, he said. And I was terrified. Me too. Good. Courage without fear is usually poor judgment. Eli looked at Vivian. Did I do poor judgment? Some of it. Dad says that about you. Silas glanced at her. I may regret introducing you. The paramedic finished bandaging his hand. Outside the tent, Warren Pike arrived with Deepwell's board counsel and 2 security officers. He stopped when he saw Vivian sitting on a folding chair in a wetsuit, mud on her face, holding a child's broken lantern. The board has been informed, he said. They want a statement. They can wait. The governor's office called. They can wait too. She nodded toward Silas and Eli. These 2 cannot. Warren looked at the single father and his son, then bowed his head slightly. Understood. Silas watched him leave. You just made a governor wait. He has staff. I have oatmeal. Eli groaned. In the middle of exhaustion, the 3 of them laughed. Grace did not erase the night. It gave them room to breathe inside it. The investigation lasted 4 months. It found that Mercer Urban Ventures had altered groundwater classifications, substituted untreated steel in temporary retaining structures, and pressured inspectors to approve public access before permanent safety work was complete. Adrian claimed he had relied on contractors, but emails showed him demanding that the promenade open before the bond signing because photographs of a successful festival would reassure lenders. Crown Harbor entered court-supervised restructuring. Adrian resigned before his board could remove him. No officers dragged him away. No judge delivered a theatrical speech. Justice arrived through canceled permits, frozen credit, civil penalties, and the quiet disappearance of people who had once praised his vision. Eleanor sold the townhouse after lenders enforced personal guarantees. She moved into a smaller property owned by her sister. Adrian accepted a position supervising commercial renovations for a regional contractor. The newspapers called it a spectacular collapse. Vivian called it arithmetic. She did not escape scrutiny. Deepwell's board reviewed her repeated decisions to extend Crown Harbor's deadlines despite internal warnings. Vivian admitted that she had allowed private loyalty to weaken professional judgment. I protected my husband, she said during the public inquiry. That protection contributed to risk. I accept responsibility. She temporarily surrendered direct approval authority over municipal projects and supported the appointment of an independent safety committee. Employees had expected the hidden owner to return like a queen demanding obedience. Instead, she submitted herself to the same rules she imposed on others. Respect grew where fear might have taken root. Silas testified only once. Adrian's lawyer tried to diminish him. You are currently employed as a greenhouse caretaker? Yes. You left federal watershed work 6 years ago? Yes. Then your expertise may be outdated. Silas looked toward the inquiry panel. Water still moves downhill. Salt still corrodes untreated steel. Gravity has not published a revision. A quiet smile passed through the room. Did Deepwell compensate you for your testimony? No. Did Mrs. Mercer? Her name is Hale. Did Ms. Hale promise you anything? Silas thought of the spare room, 3 breaths, and the family beginning without permission. Only breakfast, he said. She was late. Vivienne moved into an apartment 3 blocks from Ashmere Winter Garden, though she continued arriving before sunrise several mornings each week. Eli began leaving a 3rd cup beside the kettle. He taught her how to distinguish seeds by touch. She taught him how underground heat could travel through stone without fire. Silas pretended not to notice when his son started asking whether Vivienne would attend school events before asking him. Their affection developed without declarations. It gathered the way stars appear after a city loses power, one at a time, quietly enough that no one could identify the exact moment, darkness ended. Vivian funded Ashmere's damaged cistern repairs through an open preservation grant. Silas insisted on a repayment plan for the cottage boiler she replaced. He sent Deepwell $20 each month. She framed the first check and hung it in her private office. "That is deeply irritating," he told her. "It inspires fiscal discipline. It inspires crime." Some evenings they walked through the tropical house after closing. Vivian told him about her father, who believed affection made leaders weak. Silas told her how guilt could survive even after love became unsafe. "Do you hate Dana?" she asked. "No." "Would you take her back?" "No." "How can both be true?" Silas adjusted a misting valve. "Grace does not require reopening every door." That sentence stayed with Vivian during divorce mediation. Adrian requested access to Deepwell assets, claiming that he had supported her consulting career. Miriam Locke produced the prenuptial schedules he had signed without reading. They clearly identified Vivian's holding company, though Adrian had assumed anything bearing her maiden name must be insignificant. His claim collapsed quietly. Vivian kept her protected assets, waived rights to the townhouse, and demanded no additional humiliation. "He will say you spared him because you still love him," Miriam warned. "Let him," Vivian answered. "My dignity is not organized around his interpretation." Silas waited outside with coffee. He did not ask whether she had won. "Are you free?" he asked. Vivian looked at the closed doors. "I am beginning to be." Dana returned to Eli's life in early spring. She did not arrive at the garden or create a scene. She sent Silas a letter through a recovery counselor, explaining that she had remained sober for 19 months and wanted supervised contact with her son. Silas read the letter alone beneath the old fig tree. Vivian found him there after closing, the paper folded in his uninjured hand. "What happened?" He gave it to her. She read it and returned it without telling him what to do. "Eli deserves to know she is alive," Silas said. "Yes. He deserves safety." "Yes. I don't know whether seeing her creates healing or another wound." Vivian stood beside him beneath the leaves. "You once told me second chances are not unlimited access. It sounded wiser when it belonged to someone else." "Most wisdom does." They arranged supervised meetings through a family therapist. Dana appeared thinner than Vivian expected, with gray near her temples and shame visible in the way she kept her hands folded. She did not ask Eli to call her mom. She apologized in language a 9-year-old could understand. "I was sick, and I left when you needed me," she said. "That was not your fault." Eli asked 3 questions. "Do you still take the medicine?" "Only what my doctor controls." "Will you disappear today?" "I will leave when the counselor says, and you will know before I go." "Does Dad have to forgive you?" Dana looked toward Silas. Tears filled her eyes. "No." Eli thought for a while. "Okay." There was no miraculous reunion. Redemption began with 40 supervised minutes and 1 promise kept at the end. Afterward, Vivian helped Eli zip his coat. She realized she had been afraid he might love Dana so completely that no room remained for her. Silas seemed to read the fear. "Love is not a chair with 1 seat," he said. Vivian looked toward Eli, who was counting sidewalk cracks. Adrian had wanted a son to prove his name would continue. Silas raised one by teaching him that affection could expand without ownership. Vivian attended one final fertility consultation, but the story did not begin or end inside the clinic. She met Silas afterward on the steps of the public library. The specialist had confirmed what earlier reports suggested. Pregnancy remained possible, but unlikely, and further treatment carried significant physical risks. Silas offered her coffee. He did not ask what the doctor said until she was ready. "I could try again," she told him. "Do you want to?" part of me does. Which part? They walked beneath umbrellas through the old market square. The woman who spent 4 years believing motherhood was a locked room. And the other part? The woman who is tired of treating her body like a failed employee. Silas nodded. Both deserve respect. What do you want? She asked. You. That is not an answer about children. It is the only answer I can give without using you to complete a picture in my head. He stopped near a fountain where rain disturbed the surface in thousands of circles. Eli is my son. I would welcome another child if life gave us one. I would also welcome a life where it remains the three of us, provided that is what you choose. Vivian stared at him. Adrian had offered donors, surrogacy, and adoption only after losing access to her power. Silas offered no solution because he did not view her as a problem. You make uncertainty sound peaceful, she said. It is not peaceful. He touched her cheek. It is simply honest. Vivian chose to stop treatment. The decision brought grief, relief, and a quiet emptiness that no longer felt like failure. Eli responded by asking whether that meant she could attend more Saturday model boat sessions. Probably. Then it isn't all bad. Children sometimes reached grace without needing philosophy. That evening, he placed a small paper boat beside the brown seed Vivian had kept from her first night in the cottage. This is for the baby you imagined, he said. Vivian held him while Silas turned away to wipe his eyes. She was not a dry field, she had simply been planted with someone else's expectations. Adrian requested one final meeting after the restructuring court approved the sale of his remaining company assets. Vivian agreed to meet him at the rebuilt Crown Harbor Flood Garden, now owned by the city. Young reeds moved above the protected tidal channel. The unfinished eastern towers had been demolished, while 3 safer buildings were redesigned to include affordable apartments and a public emergency shelter. Adrian arrived without an assistant or polished presentation. His coat was ordinary. Exhaustion had softened the certainty of his face. You look well, he said. I am. I heard you are with Reed. Yes. The gardener, the hydrologist. You always correct me, because you always diminish him. Adrian watched workers install a footbridge above the channel that nearly killed people during his festival. I wanted to apologize without asking for anything. Vivian waited. I blamed you because I was terrified of becoming ordinary, he said. My father died before finishing anything he began. I thought a son, a skyline, a company, something carrying my name, would prove I mattered. Did it? No. His answer contained no performance. I still see the promenade collapsing. So do I. I hear that boy calling for his father. Vivian's expression tightened. His name is Eli. I know. Adrian looked toward the river. Can you forgive me? The old Vivian might have offered forgiveness to relieve his discomfort. Silas had taught her that grace could remain honest. I no longer wake up wanting you punished, she said. That is what I can give you. Not forgiveness. Perhaps forgiveness is what that becomes after enough truth, but it is not reconciliation. He nodded slowly. I loved you badly. Yes. Did you love me? Completely. That was why hiding myself became so easy. Workers lifted the final section of bridge into place. No one applauded. No music played. Yet the structure held. Adrian extended his hand. Vivian shook it once. Then she left him beside the reeds. Not destroyed, not fully redeemed, but finally responsible for the life he had built. Justice had spoken. Dignity did not need to say more. 1 year after the harbor disaster, Ashmere Winter Garden opened its restored eastern wing. Deepwell's new geothermal system ran beneath the building without a hum. Children moved through exhibits showing how roots shared water, how wetlands protected cities, and how heat could be drawn from stone without poisoning the air. Silas wore a dark suit Eli had selected, though he kept his old field boots beneath it. Vivian stood beside the fig tree in a deep green dress, holding the cracked blue bowl in which Eli had placed her first seed. City officials, engineers, teachers, gardeners, and several families rescued from the lantern maze gathered beneath the glass roof. Warren Pike introduced Vivian as Deep Well's founder. She spoke briefly about responsibility and the danger of ignoring what existed below the surface. Then she turned the microphone toward Silas. He resisted. Eli pushed him gently. 3 sentences, the boy whispered. Silas faced the crowd. This garden survived because people chose repair over replacement, he said. Families are not different. Neither are cities. He looked at Vivian and Eli. What lasts is rarely what never broke. What lasts is what was rebuilt with truth. The room became still. Vivian remembered another silence at Crown Harbor, one shaped by fear, collapsing ground, and a man discovering that power had never belonged to him. This silence was warmer. It held respect. Eli carried the blue bowl forward and selected 3 seeds. He gave one to Silas, one to Vivian, and kept the last. For roots, he said. For second chances, Silas added. Vivian closed her fingers around the seed. For home. No one knew Silas had placed a ring inside the gardener's tool cabinet. No one except Eli, who had inspected it twice and complained that adults spent too much money on objects too small to build anything useful. That evening, after the officials departed and the final children were collected, rain began tapping softly against the restored glass. It was not the violent storm of the year before. It fell with grace, washing the city lights into long golden reflections. Eli sat beneath the fig tree building a harbor from wooden blocks. His meetings with Dana remained supervised, cautious, and honest. Some weeks were hopeful, others left him angry. There were no perfect endings, only healthier beginnings. Silas approached Vivian, carrying the old canvas suitcase she had arrived with. The gray thread still held its repaired handle together. I found this in the cottage attic, he said. Vivian touched it. I thought I threw it away. Eli says historically significant objects belong in museums. I said emotionally significant, Eli corrected from the carpet. Silas opened the case. Inside lay the cracked blue bowl, the paper boat, and a small wooden box. Vivian looked at him. Silas, I had a speech. What happened? You intimidate the useful words. Eli covered his eyes while leaving wide spaces between his fingers. Silas knelt. No crowd, no cameras, no banners above the river. Vivian Hale, you entered this garden carrying everything you thought remained of your life. You repaired a pump, calmed my son, challenged my pride, and taught both of us that hidden things are not empty things. He opened the box. I cannot promise no one will leave, no structure will crack, or no season will hurt. I can promise truth, respect, and a home where you never have to become smaller to be loved. Vivian's tears came quietly. Yes, she whispered. Eli lowered his hands. Was that the answer? Yes. Good. My legs hurt from pretending not to watch. Silas laughed and pulled them both close. Above them, rain moved across the glass. Beneath them, pipes carried warmth through honest ground. The woman Adrian had called barren had helped save an entire harbor, but her greatest miracle was quieter. She had found a boy who trusted her, a man who respected her, and a family that did not need her to produce an heir. It only needed her to remain. In the middle of a hail-hammered greenhouse, young Eli trembled until a rain-soaked stranger tapped 3 calm beats on a copper pipe and reminded him, and all of us, that fear shrinks when it is carried together. Later, that same courage rippled across a sinking harbor. A single dad crawled into a collapsing maze because other children were trapped, and a woman who had just lost her marriage refused to lose her integrity, exposing the shortcuts that endangered an entire festival. Their choices teach a simple, seismic lesson. Real power isn't the logo on a tower or the title on a door. It's the stubborn willingness to fix what's broken, shield those who can't shield themselves, and tell the truth even when it costs you everything. Grace is maintenance, not magic. Families, cities, even hearts are rebuilt by people who believe second chances are worth the sweat. By night's end, the harbor fell silent, and that silence was respect earned by honesty, a reminder that the loudest victories arrive wearing quiet shoes. When the next storm rattles your walls, remember the 3 beats. Breathe, stand up, and reach for someone else. If this story moved you, share a time you chose courage over comfort in the comments, and smash that subscribe button so you never miss another tale that lights up